Janey Lee Grace. Welcome to the Natural Health and Sobriety Show on UK Health Radio. Hi and welcome to the Natural Health and Sobriety Show. I'm Janey Lee Grace, and I don't think I've spoken about the topic of ADHD before on UK Health Radio. And of course, it's a thing for sure, you know. Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder is what it stands for, of course. And I hadn't realised it affects 5% of the UK's population, and we know it's a condition that makes it challenging to focus, to control impulses, to regulate emotions. I also hadn't realised that studies show that people with ADHD are more likely to develop substance abuse issues, and alcohol, of course, is one of those. In fact, according to research, individuals with ADHD are twice as likely to develop an alcohol use disorder than those without the condition, which is fascinating, isn't it? And this can lead to poor decision making, dangerous behaviours, etc. Now, I do think we've seen more diagnoses in recent years. I think it's been increasing, and unless it's just that more people are talking about it, of course. There are celebs now talking openly about their struggles with ADHD. Ant McPartlin, as in Ant and Dec, Lily Allen, Denise Welch, Adrian Charles. Interestingly enough, they've all spoken about struggles with alcohol as well. And so I thought, let's have a proper conversation about this, but not just, oh, what is it, and oh, how awful that you have that diagnosis. But let's look at ways of how we can look at it holistically and actually manage it holistically. So really pleased to be able to bring you this interview with Carol May. Well, I'm really thrilled to be able to discuss a topic that I don't think I've actually covered before, which is really surprising. On all the shows that I've done over the years, I actually don't think I've really looked at the topic of ADHD. So I'm really pleased to be able to look at this from a holistic perspective as well. So really chuffed to be able to welcome Carol May. Thank you so much, Carol, for agreeing to chat to me.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Janey.
Yeah, well, I saw a little bit of the stuff that you were doing on social media, and I saw just a little bit of your work. And I don't know much about what you do. I'm sure you'll share it with us. But just the fact that I know that nutrition is a very big part of what you talk about was enough for me to think, okay, this is the right expert to talk to. So before we get into any of that, well, first of all, just tell us a little bit about your background, and then we'll get into the ADHD piece. So yeah, tell us your story.
Yeah, so I originally trained as a home economist and nutritionist, and then I retrained in midlife, like so many women do, and I became a weight loss counsellor and eating disorders therapist. But along the way, I was diagnosed with ADHD in my mid-40s. I'm now late 60s, and at a time when women were not diagnosed, girls and women were not diagnosed.
Is that right?
Yeah.
What, even as children, young adults, so much, or
no,
right,
just not diagnosed.
Wow.
I know this because my sister worked in this area, and still does, I might add, with families. But so her work was around the fact that there was no support for her as a parent and her son. And we all thought it was just boys.
Right. Wow.
And that's where this thing about it's just children being naughty comes from.
Yes, of course you do hear that. Yeah, totally crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's really interesting then, because this is what kind of prompted me to have this conversation, because obviously, as you know, I've been aware of children, lots of friends who have children. And you're right, a lot of them boys, but it's only fairly recently that I've become aware that people are diagnosed when they're older. One of my close friend got a diagnosis in her early 40s, and then I came across another friend, and I suddenly started to realize, hold on a minute, this is a thing for sure.
Yes,
right. Definitely a thing.
Definitely a thing.
So let's just take it back a bit then, for people who don't know. No reason why we should all know. Tell us what ADHD is, and how it how it manifests, particularly in adults.
So ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, And it was originally thought that girls didn't have it because we weren't physically hyperactive. So we were labeled as ADD. It's just attention deficit disorder. That's all gone now. We all have ADHD because it's our brain that's hyperactive. So I can remember saying to my ADHD coach, I said, today it feels like my brain is bouncing off the inside walls of my head. And so although I'm not physically, although I do wave my arms around a lot when I speak, I'm not physically hyperactive. Mentally, my brain is going at 100 miles an hour all the time. So it manifests differently in different people and in men and women and boys and girls. So, and that's the problem. There is no, it's not like saying, oh, you have, I don't know, ovarian cancer or something. There is, it's that they're not, there are, you know, there's a long list of traits you could have, but it's very rare that you have them all. And then we also all have a mix of usually, many also have, they might have dyspraxia, dyslexia, and a level of autism on top of that. So, and then there's ODD, which is oppositional, I think I call it oppositional defiant disorder. I don't think it's defiant, but it's about basically going, no, I'm not doing that. You know, it's when a child goes, no, just no. And, you know, lots of adults do it as well. I do it now.
But so is that a disorder though, or is that just that you've made a feisty decision?
Exactly.
So
that's grey, and that's a grey area. But the ADHD doesn't usually come on its own. There is a variety of other issues that come, and it could include depression and anxiety. It will, with women, it will always include masking, so that we're trying to fit in. So we try and be as normal, in inverted commas, as possible, to fit in with those around us, because we want to belong. You know, women naturally want to be in a tribe. But belong.
Some of the things you've described, so I'm going to ask some questions that probably sound really ignorant, right?
No,
it's
carry
probably
on.
better if I do that, because
Absolutely,
I know there'll be other
Janey,
people thinking them. But so some of those things you've described, you know, would be symptoms that we all experience. I have loads of times when my brain is going 100 miles an hour. I definitely can be defiant, you know. You know, and yes, there are many women who are people pleasers, but they don't all have ADHD.
No,
so
they don't.
Given that you can't give us a completely common denominator, and I understand that, I suppose I'm asking what is it something that is it a chemical imbalance of the brain? Is it something that you would have, you know, that would come on later in life, or that you'd always have, but you don't realize you have it?
You'll have always had it. And in women, because the way our hormonal system works, it can
get worse. Okay, I see. Which is why sometimes you don't present till you get older. I see.
Yes. So the level of estrogen that we have affects our brain function.
And
that's just that's a very simple way of describing it, but it does, which obviously men don't have. So men tend to be on a much more even keel. So what they are like as a boy, it tends to go through. They will still have similar traits. So for instance, my son isn't diagnosed. I don't know if he has ADHD or not, but he has a lot of traits which are I'm thinking, okay, he might have. He's 40 now, right? When he was a child, he wasn't disruptive in school. He was always the good boy. Does that mean he hasn't got ADHD? I don't know. He runs 4 businesses. That's very typical of an ADHDer to have multiple businesses. You know, we tend to, our executive functioning is affected. Our brain does not function in the same way. It's not wired in the same way. So there's a long list. If you go online, you can self-diagnose if you want to. And I think there's a list of about 20, maybe more questions now. When you are diagnosed by a psychiatrist, it's a 2-hour conversation, and you've already filled in the questionnaire, and the questionnaire would have taken you 3 days to fill in.
Right.
So
if you were to rock up to a kind of a regular GP or whatever,
they can't do it.
Okay, they can't do it. So right, okay. So where, what I suppose my question then would be, as I say, I have a friend who was diagnosed in her 40s, and I came across another friend. I've had a couple of Sober Club members who've said to me, "Oh my God, I've been diagnosed recently." One person said, "It actually, now I've been diagnosed, it explains everything to me about the last 18 years." She said, particularly the disorganization and the sense of failure, which is interesting. And then other people have mentioned how it can have such a strong association with drinking too much, of course, and various other things, seeking for dopamine, all the rest of it, which we'll talk about in a moment. But before we get to that, so I suppose my question is, should one be diagnosed then if you think you have these traits? If so, why? Is it just that, as that member said, then it will kind of go, then you can kind of go, oh God, that explains it?
That to me is that's the best reason for me, as far as I'm concerned. A lot of people want to be diagnosed so that they'll get the medication and they think they'll be fixed.
Right.
Or they'll get the medication and they think it will solve their problem. And for some people, it does, right? It absolutely does. But it doesn't, the medication now is, I don't know what is specifically allowed in the UK. I know the US allows a lot of there's 2 different types of medication, one based on amphetamine and one not. And so the US, they tend to have more available to them. Over here, we get both those 2 different types. But because of the NHS, there is an issue. So if you get diagnosed in the private sector, the NHS now, and this is new, it moves all the time, and now saying, no, we won't take you on, we won't give you an NHS prescription for your medication. You have to pay for it.
Wow.
So you're talking, I don't know, 120, 150 quid a month just for your meds.
Wow. Okay.
Right. Now, and for some people, you have to be titrated. It may take months and months to titrate you to a point where you are balanced. And I think probably the older you are, this is just my opinion, this isn't fact, it may get harder because our hormone levels are much more upsy-downsy.
Yeah.
So, other people go, no, I don't want the medication because I don't want it to flatten me in any way. I don't want to take pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
So they look at other ways, or they just look at coping strategies.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that makes absolute sense. So, and again, another Sober Club member was asking, what is the risk of treating ADHD with amphetamine medication? What are the risks associated with that? I mean, no long-term, medication comes without risk, does it? So,
it doesn't. And, back when I was training in eating disorders, I know we discussed appetite suppressants, which were all based on amphetamines. And I know how I used to be when I was taking weight loss appetite suppressant drugs.
Yeah.
And I know with my nephew that, over periods of time, medication had an effect on his appetite. And you cannot be medicated 100% 24/7. You can't. So it wears off. And I have had conversations with people who go, well, if I take my medication first thing in the morning, then it's running out by 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Do I take another dose? I'm not supposed to. My psychiatrist says no. But then I fall off a cliff. So there's I think for different people, it affects you in different ways. I think the only way you're going to know is by trying it, if that's what you want to do. And so, I'm a great believer in not telling people what to do. I just say, well, this is the information about it. And if you want to take medication and try it, go ahead. Let me know. I'd love to know more about your experience. Because, there's so little data on women taking the medication.
Right. I mean, it's very interesting, that you also do the work with eating disorders, because of course there is an association, isn't there, with people who are ADHD with eating disorders.
Yes.
Is that linked to that kind of the kind of dopamine kind of pathway, using food for comfort and reward and all of that? Or I guess it's difficult to say, isn't it?
There are two main eating disorders associated with ADHD. One is anorexia, which is a whole different ballgame.
Of course,
which I don't deal with. That has to be dealt with by a medical team. And for them, yes, it's all about control.
Right.
The other eating disorder is binge eating disorder,
right.
which is what I had. It's what I developed. And it's where we tend to have been dieters, like most women, quite frankly. And so if we can go all day without eating, we think that's a good day. But then suddenly the brain goes, hang on a second. Dopamine's running out. Your serotonin's getting real low. I need you to eat. I need you to eat now. And I need you to eat a lot of stuff. So it gives you those cravings for sugars and processed carbohydrates.
Right.
And that's the problem, because the more you eat of that food, the more you want to eat. And so the binging starts. And then eventually, you get to the point where you can't go a day without binging in the evening. Because it becomes that swing, like a pendulum, between the hyper focus all day, not eating, and then right, I'm going to close my laptop now, and right, I can eat anything I like. I haven't eaten all day.
Right.
All of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And so that is all about, it is all about dopamine. It is all about our hormones.
Yeah. Okay.
Really. And, the hormones and the neurotransmitters, which then give you the cravings for all of the food that we're told we shouldn't be eating.
Yeah, exactly. And the alcohol, of course, which will numb it all out for a bit.
Well, because, and again, that sugar, it's the sugar in the alcohol as well.
Yeah, okay? Absolutely.
Yeah.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
When when I work with people who want to stop drinking, we always recommend that in the early weeks they major massively on good nutrition in order to support that brain chemistry piece. So as when you first stop drinking, your serotonin, your dopamine, everything's out of whack. Your body's saying, where's my hit? All of that's going on. You've got it all needs to recalibrate. And one of the best ways we can do that, of course, is by putting in those really nutrient dense foods. So I always say to people, absolutely don't even think about fasting, or I don't care if you're normally 5'2", whatever the hell. No, absolutely not. 100% proper nutrient dense foods, protein with every meal, and let's at least do that nutrition piece. So I'm guessing that's a similar way that you look at this, is that we've got to get those building blocks of nutrition.
Yes. So what I tend to suggest to my clients, and I am generally the kind of nutritionist that says you can eat anything you like. I'm an intuitive eating nutritionist.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my aim, is to get them to that point where they're so connected with themselves and their selves and their body, that they eat only what they actually need. They listen to the messages, because your body has the wisdom, right? But initially, for the first 2 weeks, I say, right, okay, we are taking out completely carbohydrates and sugars. And they kind of look at me and I go, yeah, we're going to eat high protein, healthy fat with a few, I mean, I will allow them a few berries to go with their Greek yogurt and that sort of thing. But it is basically to get them nutritionally dense. And I don't worry about how much they eat and what time of day they eat it. Because that's another thing, that we tend to be the types that we don't actually want breakfast. We don't want to eat. Our body and brain takes a while to wake up in the mornings. It might just be my age, Janey, of course, but I mean, that's certainly what I've experienced lately, is that it takes much longer to wake up. And actually my digestion is never like breakfast. Never, ever, ever. So I'm best waiting, and I eat at lunchtime and but of course it's so ingrained in us that you have 3 meals a day and 2 snacks and, only these many calories and, but you can fast and all this sort of stuff. No, actually, for a woman, no, just no, none of that.
Absolutely.
All this stuff has only actually ever been tested on men and rats. So for women, there is actually a doctor in America who is she's doing some research into this, and it's really interesting how much our hormones drive everything for women.
Absolutely. Well, that's what I was going to say. So I guess even when we get this piece relatively right around the nutrition, as we get older and then we kick into the sort of perimenopause and the menopause, I guess everything's shaken up again.
Yes, it is. It's like putting it all into a big drum and doing this with it, turning it round again. And so you add into that mix the fact that ADHDers aren't great with focus. We're not great with meal planning. We're not great with actually going out to the kitchen and cook on our own. We actually need somebody, not necessarily in the kitchen with us, but in the house with us.
Do you know what? I saw a post that you did about this, and I thought it was
body doubling.
Fascinating. Body doubling. Do you know? I thought it was so fascinating, because I've always, for me, I'm exactly like that, and I have a real problem doing certain things if there isn't someone else around. Isn't that interesting? I'd never thought of that before.
Yes, and I used to think that was I was broken.
So needy.
I needed to be fixed. There was something wrong with me. But my dad was the same. And I'm thinking, okay, this is interesting. But, I recently, started a new love relationship. And it's made me really think how much it's been quite noticeable when I cook for him, either here or at his house, how much different it is for me. How different I feel, how much more creative I am. He's type 2 diabetic, so we actually eat similar foods, which is great. But I can get all creative. I can look in the fridge and me on my own. Nah, no chance, absolutely none. And yet it's not that I don't know how to cook, because I do. I've written cookery books. I know how to do this stuff. It's just the way the brain works.
Right.
So I've learned how to. I then have food in the fridge, which means that I can grab something. So it's not a meal as in our traditional sense, but it is good, dense, nutritional food.
Yeah, sure. So I guess for everyone, that who thinks they have this, or if they are diagnosed, as you say, they need to sort of, I guess, find ways that are going to work for them. so that it is coping strategies, isn't it? It's finding the way you rock and making sure you can find ways to support that. And obviously good nutrition has to be the starting point. Absolutely has to be, doesn't it? So even if that doesn't come naturally to you, you got to find a way, right? You got to find a way.
You have to find a way.
Yeah,
you have to find a way.
And then what else is really important? Because I'm guessing, there are other lifestyle things that are really going to support this. I mean, I would guess, getting out into nature it would make a massive difference.
I mean, I discovered cold water while swimming. And I go with a friend of mine in the river locally, and it is, I can't describe the feeling I get when I get into that water. I'm not saying it's easy, mind, but once I'm in, it's just, and then I get out and I am buzzing, but I'm calm. It is, so
it's things that ground you, I suppose, are really good.
Yes. So I like to walk on grass in bare feet.
Exactly.
Instance.
Fantastic.
Thankfully my son is a farmer, so I have access to green fields and things, but but it is also working out. So, for instance, things for me, noise is a big thing. So noise cancelling headphones. And I mean proper noise cancelling headphones can be a lifesaver. If you're traveling on a train, I've got to go into London tomorrow and I'm thinking, I think I'll take my headphones with me. Because just, the clatter of the underground or something. And sometimes just here in the centre of the town where I live, it can get really overwhelmingly noisy, and that then creates anxiety,
right?
And you stop focusing. And I've got a VA who herself has ADHD, so she and I've got an accountability buddy. And the other thing I do is I talk about it. I talk about how I feel.
I was just going to say, how much do you need to share? Because again, I think there's some similarities with when people stop drinking. The other people's responses is a big factor. But
it is.
But I suppose there's a sense of how much do you want to sort of say, in a social situation or even in a workplace situation, or well, actually, I've been diagnosed with ADHD, or I've got ADHD, therefore, I require this and this and this. And where's that fine line between seeming a bit entitled? Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Absolutely get it. So I probably wouldn't start my sentences in that way, and I think it's time that we all were tuned into what our needs were. And be able to say to people, right now, that noise is affecting me, or right now, I can't do this thing you want me to do on the computer. You could say, because I have ADHD, or because my brain is tired, or something. Or there's so much in the work situation anyway, it's so much help now out there, tech programs and stuff. I mean, I have learned about using ChatGPT in the last week, and I'm going, oh my goodness, that's a lifesaver, because you just ask it questions and it goes
gives you the answer,
and you go, oh, that's really spooky. So it's about knowing what you need as a person,
which is actually not a bad basis for any of us, right? To actually, I'm always saying to people, particularly to women who are really not very good at the self-care piece, that self-care isn't going off to your spa, it's knowing what your resources are. And particularly when people are stopping drinking, you've got to know what your resources are. What else is going to support you? What else is it going to be? And often for many of us, we've spent so many years just focused on the minutiae of life, and you're going to work, caring for people, whatever it is. We've sometimes I run my Sober by the Sea events, and I'll say to women, right, let's start with a question then. What do you want for you? And oh my God, the amount of times I've had, several people crying at that question, because they have not thought about that question since they were kids, right?
No,
and
they haven't.
We often don't. And I think, perhaps, there can be some blessings in the diagnoses like these, because they can help people recognize, okay, so I do need to look at what's going to support me, what's going to support my well-being.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely. But until we've actually gone inside ourselves, it can be very difficult to work that out. And then I get women that go, oh, I can't say that. I can't, I can't. You'll get the I can'ts come out.
Yeah.
And I go, actually, from my perspective as an old bird, it's like, oh, yes, you can. And actually, if you don't start now in midlife, you've got no chance when you're older, right? And it's one of the things, like, my partner, he's a morning person. He's an early morning person. I'm not an early morning person. So I've said to him, I'm not an early morning person. And actually, I like peace and quiet first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk first thing in the morning.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
So this is about setting boundaries, isn't it, really?
It's exactly that.
Being able to respect your wishes and other people's and set the boundaries. But we're often not very good at that either.
No.
And particularly if you've been drinking for years, let alone if you've got ADHD as well. If you've been drinking for years, you often very bad at setting boundaries, because you're on the back foot all the while anyway.
Yes.
And whatever it is you think you're going to ask for, part of you is thinking, oh, they'll just say that's because of the drink. And we don't have enough self-esteem, many of us, when we're drinking, to be able to ask for what we need, if we even know what it is, which we often don't. I always say that I lived most of my life feeling numb. Yeah.
And that wasn't from alcohol. Oh, don't get me wrong, I enjoyed drink, but my ex-husband's an alcoholic, so I have had experience of this. And when I look back, I realized that every time I would get in from my office, he'd have a drink ready waiting for me. And that would become part of my routine every day, was, oh, yeah, right, okay, I can sit down for half an hour now with my drink.
Yeah.
Well, if you haven't got the drink, what do you do then? It's like, And what gives you that, I don't know, just that kind of feeling of peace, really, and the relaxation. And so what I find with a lot of ADHD is they use alcohol in that way.
Yeah, exactly.
So, they're not alcoholic or anything like that. They're not drinking during the day, but every evening they have a glass of wine or a gin and tonic.
Yeah, exactly. And then, of course, that ramps up, as we all know.
It does.
So, I mean, I could talk to you for hours on end, obviously. But what would you say then? What are the baseline tips you want to give us? Obviously, nutrition is key.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm guessing do you have a program, or do you work with clients? Tell us how you work.
Yeah, so I work with clients. I have a 12-week program that I do with clients. If they, a lot of midlife women, they're not very sure about stuff, and they just want to dip their toe in the water. So I do offer a power hour so that they can experience how I work. They can leave with 3 key things that they can make changes with in the next month. Then they will often come back and go, okay, I'll do your 3-month program now.
Yeah. So and typically that you would include, nutrition, obviously, and
yes.
And what else would you be looking at? What the other key factors? Is it, as we've discussed, those kind of lifestyle pieces?
A lot of it is those lifestyle pieces that we have talked about, but also I do a type of kind of depends on where they are. You have to you have to meet people where they are, not where I think they are, but where they tell me they are. And, so some of them have done a lot of work, what I call personal growth work. Some have not.
Yeah.
So those that have done a lot already, we can actually build on that and do some more. So, and that a lot of that is around reconnection with self and dealing with our blocks and our fears.
Yeah, sure.
Because actually it's mostly fear that blocks us. You know, what ifs.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And if you're someone who's got that anxiety and all the rest of it. So, I mean, would you recommend that someone, if there's someone listening to this, and they maybe they're drinking more than they want to, and they're thinking, do you know what, I have got this going on. Would you? I know you'll say it's entirely up to you, but should they think about trying to get a diagnosis, or do you think it actually doesn't matter? What matters is getting the coping strategies, eating well, getting to live their best life, as it were. Is that what matters, or does the diagnosis also matter? I don't feel that the diagnosis matters as much, right? Because of exactly what I've just said.
Yes, because actually you need to be doing all the other stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Unless you know that you're going to need or want to go the medication route, in which case you need the diagnosis.
Yes.
But I'm guessing you would say that, even if someone were to be on the medication, surely you've still got to do the other stuff.
Yes, you do.
Because otherwise, you've still got to support that, haven't you?
Yes, you do. So, I mean, I have had clients who I've worked with in the past who then have a diagnosis.
Yeah.
And because I've worked with them around their weight and their food and, how much alcohol they're drinking and everything else. Then they have a diagnosis because they've suddenly thought, hang on a second, through all of this, maybe I have. And then they go, that now
explains
it's all fitting all together, right?
Right.
So, and some of the stuff that they didn't do when we were working together, they suddenly take it on board.
Yeah.
So,
really interesting.
Nothing is ever lost. I don't believe.
Do you think that what sort of can you put a percentage on it? Do you think there's a lot more people who are ADHD than know that they are, as it were?
Oh yeah.
Oh,
yeah. I don't think we've even touched the surface.
And why do you think that is? Do you think that percentage has got higher over time, or 50 years ago would it have been the same?
I like to think it would be the same. However, I think that the traits become stronger and manifest more because of our diet,
and lifestyle,
and the lifestyle and the chemically toxic environment in which we live.
Exactly, it's bad. It has to have had an impact, doesn't it? It can't not have done. I don't think.
And stress. On top of that, so our brain is going, I don't know what to do with all of this, and that's where you.
Even if you just add in, if you think back, I don't know, 50 years or something, and you think of an adult then, and then you think back, in however many years more recently, it's not only the changes in the food, which is huge changes, certainly in the last massive. Massive changes, to the extent that a lot of the stuff that people eat isn't even food.
No, it isn't.
It's not even. No, that's a conversation for another time.
No, that is. Yes.
So the fact that we are consuming chemicals, not food. But then, in addition to that, you've got all the EMFs, all the electromagnetic frequencies that are around us all the whole goddamn time. So if you've got an over-buzzing brain, you add that into the picture, and it's not surprising, is it, that kids can't sit still, for God's sake. I mean, who can when we have very little that actually grounds us, to go back to what we were saying.
No.
And whereas if you think about a kid many years, I have a really lovely friend who, when we home edited our kids for the first few years, and she ran a lovely little had a small school, and all they did was go out and climb trees and build dens. And then after they'd done that for a full morning, she'd get them to come in, she'd make them a really nutritious meal, or they would cook their own really nutritious meal. And then she'd say, fancy doing a page of maths? And she'd get like the best results out of them, because they were properly grounded, you know.
So
the differences are incredible, I suppose. We could talk for hours, couldn't we?
Totally.
Give us your website then.
So it will be called the ADHDhealthcoach.com.
Okay, thank you so much. You've been an amazing guest. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
It's lovely. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. So if you want to consider joining us in the Sober Club, we have members who are sober curious, day 1 through to 7, 8, 9, 10 years sober, because we focus a lot on the everything else. It's not just ditching the booze, although that underpins it, of course, but emotional eating is one of the things we look at as well. And we have the whole session with Carol, including an exclusive Q&A in the Sober Club member portal. And we also have a nutrition PDF on how you can support ADHD. So it's definitely worth joining us. It's not expensive. thesoberclub.com. Do check that out if it's of interest. You know where to find me, at Janey Lee Grace on social media. I have the Platinum Awards running at the moment. So if you are a brand or you have a natural product or service, then do get in touch. UK Health Radio are very much part of the Platinum Awards as well. And as I've already said, thesoberclub.com if you would like to check out membership. Don't forget, I also do family constellations. Haven't mentioned it for a while, but it's such an amazing thing for removing all kinds of blocks. And it really does benefit everyone. So do come along and check out that. You can just go to thesoberclub.com, click on events, and check when our next family constellations workshop will be. I look forward to seeing you next time. You've been listening to the Natural Health and Sobriety Show on UK Health Radio.